The Children's Aid Society a number of times in recent weeks. It's important. It's an organization with a noble mission, the protection of Ontario children from both physical and mental abuse. Who could argue with that? We consider the protection of children a national priority, but we have a lot of misgivings about how the organization is run. They've saved many kids from abuse, even death, but, and it's a big but, we've seen some devastating mistakes. Kids in their care getting abused on the one hand, while scores of other legitimate, loving families get ripped apart by overzealous and often underqualified social workers. The responsibility they have is immense, yet the accountability, the oversight of the power of these organizations is woefully inadequate. So we're about to share one such story. It's a father who we cannot name for legal reasons, whose face we have to obscure for the same legal reasons. He shares his tale of horror, nearly losing his children in a fight that cost huge amounts of both time, money, stress, all thanks to one false accusation. It all started like any other day when he went to pick the kids up at school.
Charles, that particular day, I went to pick up my children like I do every day. And when I went into the schoolyard and to the door where I normally have the kids greet me, I saw emptiness. I cannot describe the feeling of anxiety that came over me as I started to think, are these children abducted? Have they just walked over to the creek where they shouldn't? I ran as fast as I could to the offices where the principal of this school did not even acknowledge that I was there. I told him that I'm here to pick up my children, and rather than give me some sort of an explanation, he just said very coldly, "They're with me." I asked him, well, what does that mean? He says, "They're with me." He thrust a note in my hand and said, "You can call them." And I recognized the phone number for the Children's Aid Society. And very peacefully I said, "Okay, I will be back." I knew that they had no right to do what they were doing. So I went over to the police station, which is a couple of blocks away from the school, and I sought their help. Again, I was met with a cold, empty look in the eyes of this officer who said, "We can't do anything for you." Although I explained to them what was going on and that my kids were being held for reasons unknown to me, and they were not letting them come home. The police officer offered to broker a conversation with the CAS, which I accepted. When the supervisor of the Children's Aid Society got on the phone, she was extremely angry that how dare you go to the police. And so what she wanted me to do was to sign a particular document that I hadn't even seen before, which would be the premise under which they were willing to allow my kids to come home. So at this point, my kids are held at the school. I have no idea what's happening to them. I do not know what this is about, how, why, what's going on. I end up driving over to the CAS building, while at this time I don't know what's happening with my children. And I am given a document which says, you are not allowed to live at your home. The children cannot go and be near your mother. They cannot live and go near your parents' home. And they had me wanting to sign this document, which I really didn't fully understand what the legality of it was. And at least 3 times I asked them to explain, well, what exactly does this mean? And they said, look it, you want what's best for your children, don't you? Sign this document, or we're going to take your kids and put them into foster care. Now,
if I could just stop you here for a moment. What was in that document that you can recall right now? What were they asking you to sign off on specifically?
What they specifically wanted me to sign off on was that I would not reside in my own home where I've been living, where the CAS had been visiting before. They knew the home very well. And that the children would not go near my mother or my parents' home. They did not, the document did not give any explanation as to why. And
Well, what was the accusation made against you? We can't discuss specifically who made the accusation. It was someone in your life. But what was the accusation, sir?
I will tell you, it was a completely vexatious, malicious accusation. Number one, that the house was unsafe, structurally or in some way. And number two, that my mother had sexually abused me as a child, which simply never happened. And in fact, the Children's Aid Society said that they would investigate. They never did. And eventually, well, first of all, I was made to live in a hotel room because I said I'm not giving up custody of my kids, which is what they were asking me to do. And I said, I will live in a hotel before I give up the rights to my children as a custodial father. So I ended up having to live in a hotel room for a number of days prior to Christmas in 2008. In fact, I ended up having to spend all of my Christmas money on a hotel that cost me over $100 a day. But that is the position that I took to make sure that my children were safe and that they remained in my care, Charles.
So you weren't allowed to live in your home. You had to live in a hotel, and you lived in a hotel with your kids.
Yes, I did, Charles.
All right. So for how long were the kids not in your custody? How long were the CAS folks holding on to your kids?
Actually, the CAS never took my children because under duress and with no other alternative, I signed that document, and they did allow my children to come home with me. So once I signed that paperwork, I was allowed to go to the school and pick up my kids, which was about 2 hours after they had been not allowed to come home with me.
All right. So at some point you move out of the hotel, and where do you move?
I moved back into my house. I hired a forensic engineer who looked at the home and provided an incredible letter that the house is absolutely perfectly livable and perfectly safe. I enjoyed the privilege of having an occupancy permit. I conversed with the town. They said the Children's Aid wanted them to re-examine and reissue an occupancy permit. And the town said, that's ridiculous. You have every right to live there. There's nothing wrong with your home. But the
Okay,
CAS...
so once you move back home with the kids, are the CAS people still on your tail, or is it over?
Oh, they definitely are on my tail, but so am I. At this point, it was towards the tail end of what the Children's Aid had been doing to me for approximately 3 years. The January that followed in 2009, I had them on the run. It was miraculously with the aid of Canada Court Watch that gave me the direction to walk this minefield, and they eventually withdrew themselves 100%. Now, I need to tell you, Charles, that as a part of the Child and Family Services Act, it is my duty, as it is anybody else's, that if something happens to a child that puts them in danger, which this clearly was such a case, I brought this to the attention of my worker. And some days later, I followed up, and they said, well, we're not going to investigate the situation because there's not enough evidence to show that there was any harm done to your children. The difficulty I have with this is when it's one of their own being investigated, because they would have been, then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter. We're not going to investigate.
How long were the children not with you, sir?
They were with me the full time. As I said, because I signed that document.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because you're talking about the harm. You're talking about psychological harm because of this investigation. Is that what you mean, sir?
I absolutely do. The children were kept from me for 2 hours that particular day.
All right. This costs money. You can't fight any organization, especially an organization loaded with money, unless you've got money. You mentioned this organization that helped you out. How much money did you spend out of pocket to get the CAS off your tail?
My out-of-pocket expenses and my losses as a consequence of not being able to properly run my business was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Why were you not able to run your business, sir?
Because I had to devote my entire time, day and night, to dealing with the legalities and dealing with the Children's Aid Society in order to ensure the safety of my children and that they would never end up in the clutches of the CAS.
Have there been a lot of meetings that you had to go to, any kind of meetings that you felt were basically means to harass you?
Absolutely. And in fact, there was hundreds of meetings. One of the meetings that I had was with the executive director of the Children's Aid Society, and he actually admitted that what the principal did to the children was very, very wrong. And interestingly enough, there was a police investigation, which ended up being clearly a cover-up, as it turned out that a senior police officer's assistant was the sister-in-law to the school principal. And I provided verbatim tape-recorded evidence of everything that happened. And the detective that investigated neglected to provide that to the Crown. And at the end of it, when he told me that there is nothing that is going to happen, there's no charter violation, there's no harm done to you, I told the officer, this is a slap in my face. At that moment, he looked at me and he said, if you say anything more, we may end up having to start this all over again. And I looked at him square in the eyes, and I said, if you think there's something that needs to be said to the CAS, I said, you pick up that phone right here, right now, and you tell them whatever you think you need to say. I just could not believe as to how much protection the Children's Aid Society receives, even when a parent and a child is harmed by them.
Last question, sir, and then I'll let you go. Are you out of the woods with the CAS as of now?
I am out of the woods, but I will tell you, Charles, a lot of tremendous emotion has come out this weekend thinking about, talking about this today, and I will tell you that every single day I live in fear because I'm never sure that a vehicle that drives by my house is that a Children's Aid Society worker that for some reason or another is there to take my children. And I cannot describe what incredible mental anguish that is to live under. I haven't slept well in about 6 years.
Thank you very much for your story, sir, and I wish you and your family good luck.
Thank you, Charles.
I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home. Let the rain wash away